God, let the message be heard.
It's live. Hey, we're live now.
So
The question
we're
is
live.
where are we live?
well, we're going to find out. I believe it's on my Facebook page and on Ohio.
All right, we'll find out.
see.
Here, I've got a separate way to look too. So, your Facebook
Yeah.
page, huh? Brian Blackburn.
Yeah, it says it's Brian Blackburn's live now in Open, Ohio. So I could start a watch group with that party. I'm going to start a watch party, Open, Ohio.
So I could start
Oh, there we are. Yeah. Yes, we are live on Facebook right now, all three of us. On your page, Brian.
Welcome, everyone. Perfect. All right.
Let's see, what am I?
We'll wait for just a minute or two, and then I'll kick us off.
Are we on your
That's
page as
helpful.
well, Jack?
We are. Yeah, I just launched the live party. Can everyone hear?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Welcome. All right.
Okay, and I can see some folks that are coming in. And before we get too deep into this, because we've been sitting here for a few minutes, if I don't get a glass of water right now,
Yeah.
I'm going to have a meltdown. So I'll be right back. I'll let you chat with the folks as they're joining.
Okay.
There's folks joining
Excellent.
from the Open Ohio page, as well as my personal page. Jack, I think your page as well, right?
Yep, I'm live. All right, gang. Welcome. It's an honor and a privilege.
Yeah, it's on Jack's page.
It's an honor and privilege to be here with you tonight. So first of all, many of you already know I'm Jack Windsor, independent investigative journalist, covering COVID-19, particularly Ohio's response through WMFD out of Mansfield. And I call myself a truth seeker. I'll give you a little bit of background about me, about how I got to where I am today. And then I'm going to turn the mic over to really the two that you're here to see, listen to, and learn from tonight. But I've spent the better part of my professional career working with organizations as a strategist, as a consultant, in some instances as an employee. But my end game has always been the same. I help organizations move from point A to point B by getting the right talent on the bus, people, employing the right processes, and choosing the right technology to get from where they are to where they want to go. So you've all heard me talk about before our schema, our worldview, our experiences, the things that we have gone through in life really shape how we see things. And so coming into, and I'll talk about the news business here in just a second, coming into this COVID-19 crisis response, that was my worldview. That's how I saw things. I look at a situation and I say, okay, here we are, and that's where we want to go. And with COVID-19, for me, it was we want to save as many lives as possible. We want to preserve the economy. We want to keep the state from going bankrupt. And so if those are the end goals, at least from my vantage point, and everybody has a different nuance to that, how are we doing with that? And based on really good feedback from people like Brian and Dr. Frank, who I'll introduce in just a minute, things were a little bit off kilter for me in the beginning. Real-time data is really important, whether you're running an organization or you're running a state or you're coaching a football team. You have to be able to take in information, and then you have to be able to apply that information to optimal performance. So that is really the schema that I started looking at things, or the lens that I started looking at things through. And a little bit about the news business. My passion for news comes from just a real deep understanding that words matter. How we think, how we feel, how we behave, that delivers our results. And the press is in a really unique position. The press has the opportunity to show up, learn things, and then report back to their communities what they've learned. And to me, that's a really, really important role. So a few years back, I had the opportunity to onboard with a local independent online news organization. And, I fell in love with what I was doing there because we understood that the stories that we tell ultimately become the stories that we believe, and it becomes what manifests in the communities that we represent. So to me, the stories that we tell, the data that we share, the things that we write, the things that we say, they impact our communities, they impact our listeners and our viewers. And that is something that gives us a tremendous amount of responsibility. And what I mean by that is to whom much is given, much is expected. So that's my vantage point. There's a stewardship responsibility in reporting and in sharing news and information. And my dog in the fight, you heard me say this on my broadcasts, on news spots, on the radio, my dog in the fight is the truth. And I've found two incredible people who are going to unveil some of the truth tonight. And they're going to talk about what's going on in the state of Ohio with respect to numbers, with respect to their reporting. And they're going to talk about what's going on in the United States. If you picked up a USA Today last week or a Columbus Dispatch.
Is that me freezing up?
Are you still with us, Dr. Frank? If you picked up any of those publications, what you discovered was that there are hotspots throughout the country, and that has become the focal point of reporting. The new number of cases in Ohio, the new number of cases out in Arizona, the new number of cases in Florida, Texas, other areas. But we're going to talk about that. I think we're going to actually lead off with Dr. Frank, who's going to talk in depth with us about that. But give me just a moment, and I want to make sure that we still have both of them here. Dr. Frank, are you still with? Okay, there you are.
I'm here.
Excellent.
Did we lose Brian?
We may have lost Brian.
Oh, there he is.
There's Brian. Okay, excellent.
I'm here, you guys.
So,
and I'm not Jack, so.
So
I'm still learning how to use this technology, so we'll see. You can see there, I like that little ticker tape there at the bottom. So
Dr. Frank Payne's nice kids.
I think did we just rebroadcast again? Did we just restart? Do you know?
No, I don't think
it says live to 728.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, for those following along here, we're all kind of newbies at this technology we're using. So I'm going to switch over and hopefully we see all of us there hanging out. How's
Excellent.
that?
There we go. All right. So that's my dog in the fight. My dog in the fight is the truth. My background is one who has worked in organizations and honestly been obsessed with the idea of how do we take people, processes, and technology and get to a better end. And when I look at the state of Ohio, that is my continuous question. How are we utilizing everything that we have at our disposal to get to the best end, which is to save the most lives as possible, to keep an economy that's viable, and to make sure that we still have money in the treasury so that critical government services can continue to be provided even after this passes. So that being said, I'm gonna segue into letting Dr. Frank talk. And some of you have already heard about Dr. Frank. I started following him early in this pandemic, and he changed some things for me. His modeling really changed the way that I looked at what was going on. Dr. Frank has a PhD in surface electric chemistry. He's been modeling phenomena for over 40 years, including several epidemics like the AIDS epidemic, Ebola, for example. He's been featured prominently on the covers of leading scientific journals, and he is a math and science chair at the Schilling School for Gifted Children, where he works with some of the brightest young minds in the country. And I hope I'm not off on this, but you can correct me if I am, Dr. Frank. I think that you are actually also one of the few in the country that actually modeled the correct outcome of the 2016 presidential election.
We froze up somehow. Oh, there we go. Now you're back.
Excellent. So, Dr. Frank, there at the end, I said, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that you're actually one of the few who successfully modeled the result of the 2016 presidential election.
I did do that right, yes.
So you're no stranger to modeling. You're no stranger to epidemics. And based on what I followed, you're no stranger to being able to predict through data analysis what's going on and what's going to happen. So, without further ado, I'm gonna introduce Dr. Frank. And my first question for you, Dr. Frank, if you don't mind, is
fire away.
I'll start it this way. What are you seeing right now in the United States? So we've heard about Arizona, we've heard about Florida, we've heard about Texas and how these hot spots are popping up, right? So there are a lot of cases, and what I've heard in the mainstream media is that we should really be very frightened, and that this is indicative of a second wave that may be worse than the first, and that we may actually have to roll back the opening up that we've done. So multi-layered question there, but I'm going to let you talk about what you're seeing across the United States right now and how you got to see it.
Okay, that's a great question. Can you all hear me okay? Uh-oh. Yeah, okay.
Yep, we can hear you fine.
Okay, great. I'll go ahead. So I've been modeling all these countries and all the states across the United States since December. I always pick some kind of project to do with my students that's a real life project, not merely just like teaching them calculus out of the book. I always pick a real project. This year, normally we would have modeled the election because it's an election year, but it just so happens that one of my students is an exchange student from, guess where? Wuhan, China. So we decided to model that epidemic this year. I rotate through multiple kinds of things we model for a real life example, sunspots and climate and all sorts of fun things. But anyway, this year we picked that. So I've been modeling this stuff since December and using the data that are coming out. And I defined a specific experiment for myself. I didn't allow myself to watch the media at all. And I've only been gathering two kinds of data the whole time. I've been gathering the reported cases and the reported deaths every day. In recent weeks, I've been also able to download from many websites not just merely the reported data, but also the data as it aligns on a certain date. So for example, today they might report a certain number of cases in Ohio, but some of those cases might be from the past. So you need more detail about the cases before you can interpret it. So I've been able to download some of that too as well.
Can I jump in there real quick on that?
Yeah, sure.
So the number of cases today reported was 730.
Yeah. So my guess would be when I look into that, I haven't done it because I've been out today. If I look into that, what we'll find is probably most of those are not live cases. It's not like somebody came sick to the hospital today and they measured it and they said, oh, there's a case, check mark. Most of those cases are probably past cases that either the state just received and so now they're reporting it, or sometimes, and here's an example of this. Somebody PM'd, private messaged me yesterday. They're a nurse and they got sick. They had COVID and they're not allowed to go back to work until they test negative 3 times in a row. They've been testing for week after week after week with positives. Guess what? Each one of those counts as another case. So it sounds like there are multiple cases today, but it's just one person. So there are a lot of those repeats as well. So I don't mean to get too far afield, but when you see a number on a particular day that says, number of cases, I tell the people on the Dr. Frank Models page, just don't even talk to me about cases. Unless you have all the details that go behind the cases, cases are the wrong way to monitor the epidemic. There are much better ways to model it. And
do you mind if I
just don't even bother? It's almost like unless the state is really transparent and provides you all the back information that goes with it, it's almost worthless. So that's how I think about cases anyway. But sometimes they give you clues.
Yeah, we'll come back to Jack. We'll come back to Ohio in a few minutes, and we can get back into today's conversation. But I know, as we all have been talking, you've seen a lot of things at the national level that are similar to Ohio, or dissimilar. That's be kind of interesting to hear what that's like from your perspective.
Yeah, like the Nevada data, for example. Yesterday, here, can you see my screen? Am I sharing my screen with you guys?
Yes.
Okay, so if I bring up the Nevada data, here are the Nevada data that I just updated the other day. Can you all see this all right? If I drag my mouse, can you see where my mouse is going?
Yep.
All right.
Yeah,
So,
so for the folks that aren't familiar with the data, can you explain a little bit what
yes,
all the
what it is.
dots and everything?
Yeah, and the
What are we
trend
looking at
lines.
here?
Exactly.
It looks like a paint splattering to some folks, you know.
Yeah, I totally agree. So on this axis here, on the left axis, the vertical axis, this is the number of deaths per day. So this line here is 10 deaths per day. And then this is the date across the bottom. So for the state of Nevada on, let's just say, May 30th, there were about 5 deaths a day. There it is. See right there, 5 deaths a day. And you notice that the number of deaths goes up and down. It kind of goes through a pattern. There's reporting issues, and there are aspects to the epidemic itself that make it oscillate up and down. But you notice that the number of deaths per day never got above about 10 deaths per day in Nevada. So that's what these black dots are. These are the data from the state. It's what they report. I'm not like reading anything into it. These are just the data that they report. Then the red dots are the number of cases that they report every day. And you notice that I've multiplied that. I've basically divided it by about 30 because there's many more cases than there are deaths. But I want to just show it on the same scale. So you have to multiply this by about 30 to know how many cases. So for example, on that example day that I picked, the 30th of May, there's about 150 cases that day and about 5 deaths. So that's that. That's what this curve shows you. It shows you versus time, how many deaths the state reported and how many cases the state reported. So watch as the epidemic grows into a nasty thing. You hear this big wave. Think of it like a hurricane. This is when it's a Cat 5. This is when it's really nasty and the wind is blowing and people are dying and it's not very fun. This is the bad part here. And then the hurricane's going past, and then now maybe we're Cat 4, Cat 3, Cat 2, Cat 1. Now we're downgraded to a tropical storm. And, we're down to one death per day being announced by the state in Nevada. So you notice it's going away. So they're essentially, their hurricane is past. They're cleaning up now, and there's some puddles on the ground. But something interesting is happening here. You notice as the deaths are going down, the cases are going up. The reported cases. Now, wait a minute. That doesn't make any sense. How can we have fewer and fewer deaths and suddenly the cases are exploding? That's a problem. That doesn't seem to make sense to people.
And that's the hockey stick right there.
It is. It's the hockey stick.
Yep.
Exactly. And there are lots of possible reasons for this. But just for the first back of the envelope, you don't even have to dig into the weeds. You just notice that the cases are taken off, but the deaths are dying off. So you know that cases are not a good way to track the epidemic. Something else is going on with this. Now, I see this pattern in a lot of states. What happens is when the epidemic has gone through its nasty phase and it's fading out, what happens right about here? The states, they're breathing a collective sigh of relief. Phew, boy, we're glad that thing's passed. So they go back and they start looking through their records and they start finding deaths that they've missed or find cases that they've missed, and they start reporting those. So it's actually quite common near the end of the epidemic to see some bumps here just because they're going back over their vital records and finding things they missed. That's pretty normal.
Okay.
Also, sometimes you'll see these cases take off because, for example, near the end of the epidemic, you want to make sure you've cleaned it up real well. So you'll go in and dramatically increase the number of tests in a particular region, and so you'll collect a lot of extra tests. You're not causing more cases, and there aren't more cases on the ground. You're just finding more of them because you're doing more testing. So we call that a testing anomaly. So you've got testing anomalies, you've got reporting anomalies, you've got backdating, you've got lags in reporting, all kinds of things that go into this. But basically, bottom line on the Dr. Frank models page, don't show me any cases. Unless you have the background information, they don't predict what's really going on.
They don't predict, and
this is kind of an example.
Represent.
Say again?
I said they don't predict, and they can misrepresent because we had a bunch of people jump on, and I want to go back to what you said earlier because I think it's critically important. Number one, we know that if someone has been found to be positive,
Yes.
then if they're in isolation or quarantine, they have to successfully test
Yeah.
negatively twice. And sometimes on the way to doing that, they have 3, 4, 5 other positive tests.
Yeah.
Those actually count as positive cases. Now, another question
Yes.
that I've had asked is, and I think I know the answer to it, but when we look back, I think December 28th was a date that was on the CSV file, a date that they had as the onset for the case, now, or for the virus. That's been since removed. But we know that this was here in the beginning of January, and we have cases that are reported positive at the beginning of January. So cases then, do they include antibody tests, or do they include just kind of this tracing where we say, okay, we assume that they had it then? So are those other anomalies or other factors that add in and maybe misrepresent the actual number of cases?
I'll jump in a little bit.
Go ahead,
I'll
Brian.
jump on a little bit on this one. So we're talking about Ohio again, but if we focus on the national scene for a moment,
Sure.
A couple of weeks ago there was a story run. I can't remember who picked it up, if it was CNN or who it was, and for those who jumped in a little bit late, one of the uniquenesses about Dr. Frank and I and our approach to this whole thing, we're both data guys. He comes from a teaching and a science background. I come from a medical data background, but also from a kind of a public communications perspective. So I'm heavily focused on the messaging side of what's coming out from the various government agencies, the health departments, what's coming out from the news agencies, both sides of the aisle. If you look at it, it's a medical issue anyway. It shouldn't be a partisan one, but we all know that's kind of where we're at now. But I'd say with fair certainty up front, especially in Ohio, this was not a partisan issue. This was a people thing.
Right.
And so I listened carefully to messaging across the whole spectrum. As first of all, I had a personal interest. My grandmother's in a nursing home.
Yeah.
My niece at the time of the breakout in March was in Italy. She was in southern Italy, thankfully, but she's an exchange student there. And so I had a real personal interest in knowing, between my brother and I, trying to figure out what was going on there. He's a school administrator, he's superintendent of schools out in central Colorado. So, I've got friends in different parts of the country listening to what they were going through. And so that's what caused me to kind of use my 10 plus years of building data models for Mayo Clinic and MD Anderson and others. I called a few friends around to see what they knew and started to dig in. But I listened very carefully to the messaging side of it because I wanted to understand what was being communicated, started logging on not only press conferences in Ohio, but Texas, New York. I watch Cuomo every day. The federal press conferences, obviously, New Jersey, Florida. You could get on most of those. I couldn't watch them live. I'd have to watch replays at night. But so that's kind of the uniqueness, is I was listening carefully on the messaging side and on the news side of it, whereas Dr. Frank, you pretty much isolated yourself in all of this.
On purpose, yes.
Yeah, on purpose, right. So, but we both dug into the data, and I focused pretty much on Ohio, but I used other states to kind of bounce up the different analysis and things that I was hearing. And it's been interesting to unpack that. A lot of folks will say, well, you're not a doctor, you're not an epidemiologist. And no, I'm not. But I'm a data analyst. And so this is a data problem and a messaging problem that we're dealing with, not just a medical one. And what we're dealing with right now is I'll just use Ohio as an example, and I'll come back to your comment, Jack. In Ohio right now, we have a situation where our governor is having to go on to almost every press conference right now. He'll take a few moments to encourage people to go to their doctor to deal with legitimate health issues, because people are so afraid right now. There is so much fear. And so even as we've opened things up, what we're dealing with right now has become a public relations situation where folks don't, and there's differing opinions on how to deal with it. Do you go out and put in more restrictive rules so that people will feel more, quote unquote, confident to go out? Or do you do the flip side and help people to understand from a data perspective exactly what kind of risk do I face by going out without taking any additional precautions? And so trying to find a balance between those two things is very interesting. And that's where a lot of, we'll call it politics, but it's just different worldviews come into play. And I know, Dr. Frank, you and I have both bumped into this situation where we see training that epidemiologists has come into play from the very
Yes.
beginning.
Yes.
So I'll mention Ohio's, but I'm really interested to hear yours as well. I know we talked about this in Ohio, and I've learned this from talking to state legislators as well as folks in the health department itself and in the technology offices at high levels that have said, and by the way, they've said this in press conferences as well. They're not afraid to hide it. Well, they are hiding it, and that's the whole point. They're hiding the data intentionally. People are like, well, is that legal? Well, I don't know. I can tell you this. They are very, very clear that, and I'll just give you a quote. So we got this quote early April, late March, where I started questioning some things, and we were told that the health department was not going to release any data and information that would potentially lead people to, quote, not obey their orders, end quote. That wasn't the last time I heard that phrase. I heard it used about a month later, where folks again said the same thing, that, well, Memorial Day weekend was coming up, and even as things were opening, they didn't want to give people a false impression, or an overly optimistic, I think was the actual phrase used, an overly optimistic impression of what might be going on, because they were afraid, again, that people wouldn't obey the orders and that they would just kind of cast off all caution. Where I'm not personally suggesting that the virus isn't real and that people aren't getting sick and that folks haven't died. My grandmother was tested positive, and it was a really hard 2 weeks as we waited to see if she'd get symptoms or not. Waiting to find out what would happen to my niece, if she'd be able to get out of there, what would happen. But the data for me gives me comfort, because the deeper you go into the data, the more you understand who's at risk, what type of precautions to take. And you don't just have to rely on the government to give you part of the story. And so, Dr. Frank, I know you've heard from other folks outside of Ohio about this whole scenario about what data we share with people or what don't we share with people.
Yeah. Early on the Dr. Frank Models page, I had epidemiologists on the page who were very angry with me. And they were saying, do not show the data in this way. You will kill people. And I was like, whoa, nobody wants to kill people. I don't want to kill people. So should I show what I find? Should I actually show the real data? And I sweat blood over that for a few days, because who wants to kill somebody? But I came to the conclusion that the right thing to do is what we should do. We should always be truthful. We should always be honest. We should show the data the way it really is. And I started showing the data on my pages, and suddenly I was overwhelmed with followers and people coming there on a daily basis because they want to know what's up. So it's been really exciting for me on Dr. Frank Models to see people come there all the time, and they ask real questions. We go exploring. Like, somebody would come to me and say, oh, my news report today tells me that, we have all this spike in cases. Are we okay? What do we do? How do I find out? And so some of the state websites are really transparent, and you can go to those sites and you can find out by the city even how many cases there are. Were they in a rest home? Where are they general? Is it a wild infection? Is it going through the community? You can find out all those details, and they can really find out if they're safe or not. Some of the states are exactly the opposite. South Carolina, for example, if you go to their website, they provide you almost nothing. And it's not an accident, and it's not that they are they've made a choice not to show the data. And they think that some of it has to do with HIPAA regulations and things like that. So the problem is now their people are afraid. Their people don't have a way to know, and they have to rely on the media, and they have to rely on their legislators, and they're not always forthcoming with the data you need to know. So it varies state to state, but that's why I think that the Dr. Frank Models page has become so popular, because people come there, we analyze the data together, and we find out where we really stand. I've found that it's not even necessarily, are we going to lose 1,000 people this week? Or are we going to lose 10,000 people this week? It's not even the number that matters. It's just the fact that we can discuss it honestly, discuss it truthfully. We can, it takes away the fear suddenly. Where do we really stand? When I listen to the television, it's like a panic mode. But when we look at the data together, we relax and we study it together, and that's been really a real blessing. It isn't why I started the page. I started the page just because, sort of like you, Brian, I was trying to figure out, where are we really? Is my family safe? Can we take at the Schilling School, I was going to take a group of kids over to Austria. I mean, not Austria, was a couple years ago. I was going to take them over to the Baltic States for a choral festival. And are we safe? Can we do it? And no, we couldn't. And we did the calculations. We found out, oh, don't do that. So it's nice to know. So that's why I think the page has really grown, and I've learned so much just by doing all the states. I recognize the patterns. So
I want to press pause right there. And first of all, thank you both for sharing. We're about a half an hour in. We still have people hopping on. And I just want to summarize a little bit.
Yeah.
And I'm going to start with, to me, just the most glaring wow moment. I've heard it from both of you. I've heard it from an epidemiologist on my own. And what we all three have heard is that the message gets packaged in a way to manipulate our behavior. And I'm not attacking anyone on that, but I just heard you both say it, that, look, if you report the truth, you're going to kill people.
Yes.
If you don't report it this way, you're going to do a disservice, which I'll tell you why that doesn't sit well in my stomach, is that we were promised at the beginning that we were going to have transparency and we were going to have data. And in a sense, we've had the data, but I don't know that we've had, the full transparency. The right data. Correct. So, that's really interesting to me. I think that is such an important point, and I don't want to provide a lot of commentary on it. I just want to say that you both have heard it in Ohio. I've heard it from a separate Ohio epidemiologist who said, look, we intentionally package the messaging for a reason, and it's to really be conservative, I guess, or to affect how people are going to act, because if they get the real data, then they might be, too liberal with their behavior and,
too cavalier.
Too cavalier. That's a great way to put it. Now, I also want to say this too, because I introduced Dr. Frank early on as a PhD, someone who's done modeling for 40 years. Brian, you hit it a little bit, but I think I want to say it again. You've done over 12 years. You have over 12 years of experience building data solutions for some of the leading medical providers and pharmacies, Mayo Clinic, MD Anderson, Duke University. So, you're not just throwing darts blindfolded. You both are coming at this from the vantage point of data and modeling. And I'm going to say something that may rub people the wrong way, but, all three of us have kind of taken, our hits a little bit in the public square.
Cut out.
Can you still hear me?
I can hear you still, Jack.
All three of us have taken our hits in the public square. And I know that none of us make it about ourselves. This is about the greater good. But the thing that I want to point out is that the experts have been wrong from get-go. And that's not a judgment on anything other than, in the beginning we saw a model that said we were going to have 62,000 cases a day. Then it was ratcheted down to 10,000 cases a day. And now it's, 2,000, I think. But it's interesting to me that the mindset is, look, we have the information, but we're going to package it in a way to control the behavior that we want from you, which doesn't feel like integrity to me. And I'm not speaking for either of you, but that just doesn't feel like responsible leadership and integrity to me. And then when you combine it with the experts, if we're going to talk baseball here, they have a batting average of 0. So I'm not really ready to elect them to the All-Star game just yet. So, Dr. Frank, I want to go back to, and then we're going to hop over to Brian about Ohio. Sure. But so, you hit Nevada a little bit, and you talked about cases and how cases really aren't the epicenter, because cases are going up because we're testing more, but deaths are going down. It looks like a Category 5 with cases, but it's really kind of a tropical storm versus a Cat 5 hurricane with deaths. And are you seeing that? Because the other things we're hearing, Florida, Texas, right? Are you seeing the same things across other states?
Yeah, that's a great question. And what you can do is you can go to a state, like, can you guys all see this graph? Am I sharing my screen, Brian? Am I sharing a screen here?
I don't see it yet.
Okay.
There. Oh, here it comes.
Okay, good. Focus. Are we up now?
We're clocking.
Yeah. Maybe. All right. Well, okay, let me just talk about it then.
Okay.
As long as the cases are being shown by date of onset, cases are a lot more useful. So you can go across the country, and many of the states show that. And so the pattern that I've learned is that if you're most of the states now that are reporting cases only by report date, they look like spikes. They look like they're going bonkers. But
Say that
if,
one more time, Dr. Frank, because that's really super important. I'm sorry to interrupt, but say that one more time.
as you go across the country, if you look at states that are only reporting cases, it's like I call that reported cases. Like you mentioned today that Ohio reported 700 cases. So states that are doing reporting in that way, those cases are, I have not yet found a situation where that was reflective of live infection on the ground. That's almost always backdating or asymptomatic cases, or they've done some mass testing procedure across a lot of people, and they've found a lot of people who had COVID and didn't even know it. You know, for example, for every 100 people that get infected with COVID, only 30 of them show symptoms. So there's 70 people who don't even know they had it. Okay. And now, so if you do some random testing across the population, you'll find some positives, but those are old positives. Those were months ago when they were sick and they didn't even know. So when I go across the country and I study state by state, I find any place where they've only reporting cases by the day, like reported cases, they're almost all too high right now. They're inflated. Whereas if a state, can you see this graph that I've got here?
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
This is for Michigan. And here you notice they've got cases by date of onset. So this is the number of cases per day. So this would be like, Jack, you said 700 today in Ohio. Well,
Yeah.
this is 800 right here. This is 800 in Michigan on a certain day, right?
Yep.
But these are cases of onset. So these are people that are sick. They've gone in, they've said, I'm sick. This is the day I'm sick. And they do a test that day. So see, these data are very useful. These are telling you, hey, how many people are getting sick every day, right? And see, that's a nice trend. But if you switch this to the reported data, it'll go up at the end. So it's like the data itself teaches you that the cases these days are not really what we should be monitoring. We should be monitoring the deaths. And here are, by the way, the deaths by date of death. You notice for Michigan again, and you notice they had a peak. This was when it was a Category 5. This was when it was a horrible hurricane. But now look, they got a few puddles left on the ground. Their epidemic is over. Now we're down to just cleanup mode. You know, it's sort of like the hurricane's gone by, and now we've got to clean up. So that's why I don't like using cases. Now here's Florida. You were asking about other countries. So Florida, this is from their state webpage. And you notice that their cases are like exploding. Now we know better, don't we?
Yep.
We know. And you notice that they're showing it for the last month. And you notice that it's gradually going up, going up, going up, going up. But here are their deaths by day for the last month, going down, going down, going down, going down. And you can go on to their website and you can actually download the deaths per day by assigned date. But you have to download the data and you have to work it up yourself. They don't do it for you. And you notice on March 1st, they had a few deaths and it got really big and nasty. And they, about the 10th of April, it was a Hurricane Cat 5 in Florida. It was not a good situation. And then since then, it's been gradually declining. And look, they're done. So if you're reporting massive number of cases, that's not what you should be thinking about. The epidemic's over. And you see, here's their cases again. See how it's taking off. This represents something else other than the live epidemic. That's the point. So as I go state by state across the country, basically the country's done. The hurricanes are gone. There are just some hot spots left. I kind of like to describe it to people like, imagine there was a massive forest fire that came through. The fire's out. It's been contained. But there are firefighters going around kicking over the logs and putting out the hot spots. And those logs would be like, some of the densest cities where they're still cleaning up, that sort of thing.
Let me add two things there, if I may. So it's interesting. We know that's really problematic for a couple of reasons. Number one, we know that we're beholden to these numbers. on a daily basis. We know
I
that our
can't hear
leadership
anything. Oh, there you're back.
has told us in the state of Ohio, and I'm bringing it to Ohio, and I don't mean to keep doing that, but I'm just giving the example I'm most aware of. We're beholden to these numbers, and we're told that our policies and whether we roll out faster or roll back, to some sort of lockout is going to be contingent upon our current situation. So now, to the governor's defense, he's talked about hospitalizations, which is why I get a little bit confused why the media is reporting cases. If hospitalizations are the thing, if R0 is a thing, and I know Brian will probably jump into that, why are we continuing to report cases? And by the way, when they get reported, we're not really hearing all of the things that can go into that huge basket of cases. So it's really this big. You've ever seen one of those rubber band balls? It's this really big, scary rubber band ball when it's really probably one rubber band. And so it really misrepresents, and that's important to me. And I know I'm kind of kicking this horse a little bit, but how we think and how we feel affects how we behave. And I've heard individual stories, anecdotes where people have died because they did not go get care.
Yes,
they couldn't because they weren't allowed, or they were too afraid to do it. That's a problem.
Yeah, it's been a problem. I've got several friends that are in the medical profession and surgeons and so forth that have literally taken pictures of their wings of their hospital that early on that were dark, that were shut down. Yeah. And we saw reports of that all through the late March, early April, all through the month of April. It started to reach a kind of a fever pitch at the end of April, as not only were folks not going in to get care, but the very thing that we started off with the whole discussion about should we lock down or shouldn't we lock down, it was all about not saving lives from the virus directly. It was about saving lives from the hospitals being overrun. Yes. And those hospitals no longer being able to provide adequate care to everyone that needed it. And we've completely lost sight of the context of that particular message, which was up front. We had to flatten the curve so that we could save hospital capacity. And Dr. Acton in Ohio, for instance, and she wasn't the only one. We had folks at the federal level and every other state in the union that were out telling people, you don't want to be Italy, you don't want to, and then when New York City came along, you don't want to be New York City. No. But as they explained the curve, and Dr. Frank, if you wouldn't mind going to the Ohio site, and we can look at just a couple of things on the Ohio site, because I think it's really it. Let me bring your screen back up here.
This is the state of Ohio. This is the state of Ohio. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you want to jump, and this will be great for folks that are into the Ohio data. If you want to go, while we're here, let's just take a moment. We'll just kind of give folks a 101 of the state website. So you showed earlier on, and we're going to jump topics here a little bit, Jack, if you can remind me to come back to the topic of viral load if I missed it, and then also the context of what was going on. But this is a great moment because we're going to lose folks here pretty soon, probably. The hospitalization. Can you flip over from?
Hey Brian, let me pause you real quick right there, because we're in a transition. I apologize to interrupt. I do want to remind listeners and viewers, if you have questions, please post them, because we do want to take some time, whether you have questions about Florida, Nevada, hot spots around the country, or as we dive into the state of Ohio and the numbers that we're seeing here, please ask those questions. We'll answer them. Okay, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you happen to go to my personal Facebook page and you post your question to my page, we'll actually see it live here, and we'll take some of those, save some time for those questions. The hospitalizations, if you want to show everyone that little white bar in the middle of the screen there, and the drop down menu that says the cumulative count there. That's a little hard.
Do you want me to change it to daily count?
Yeah, change it to daily count, and folks are going to see the graph change. Mm-hmm. And it's going to show exactly what you were talking about on your screen a moment ago when you were showing the other states. Okay, we'll just give it a second here. There's a little bit of a lag on our end, so it'll show up in a moment here.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I switched to daily count.
Okay, it'll show in a second, hopefully. It's like we're the drum roll here as we wait.
Yes.
Wait, there it goes. There it goes. All right, so everyone should have seen in the middle of their page now how the graph dramatically changed. Okay, So everyone thinks they see, as a matter of fact, it's really illustrative because you can look underneath and you can see the deaths, and it's shown in a cumulative fashion of this graph that just shows everything going up, 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 up.
Sorry, I'm
Your
not hearing
average,
you right now. So if you're giving me instructions, sorry, I'm not ignoring you. I'm just not hearing you.
that's okay. You're coming in and out, honest, Dr. Frank, but hopefully you come. Everyone can still hear me and Jack.
I can hear you.
think.
I can hear you now.
Okay, great. So the common person comes in and they see the death count and the cumulative case count as well, and they just see this up, up, up graph, and they don't understand that there's detail underneath of here for them to get a handle on. So the hospitalization, I give the state a lot of credit. They added this little filter about 2 weeks ago that allows you to flip between the cumulative count and the daily count. So now what Dr. Frank's showing you on the screen is the ohiocovid.gov site that everyone has access to. And you can see right in the middle of the page now, you're seeing the hospitalizations by onset date. And you can see that the peak of hospitalizations was all the way back at the end of March. People are shocked when they see this. So when you think of flattening the curve from a save the hospital capacity perspective, you can see that by the time we had put the first restrictive order in place to close down schools and businesses, the hospitalization rate was already on its way down. So folks, they'll talk to me about how, well, it's because of the shutdowns that we flatten the curve. And all I have to do is show this date of onset, and you can see the hospitalizations. We know that hospitalizations trail case identification by a couple of weeks. So that means that if you were to look at the case count in a similar fashion, you should find those kind of parallel graphs, which you do. Now, a couple of other things about the site right now. They don't have the.
Brian, let me jump in there real quick. I want to make one point that's really super important, because seeing with your own eyes is critical. But I'm going to tie this back to what you said earlier. So I apologize for being a bad host, but this is a critical point. I had the chance to read an affidavit that was submitted in the Lake County hearing regarding Rock House Gym. And it was submitted by someone who has done the regression analysis and spoke exactly to what you said, that the deceleration started, and the state knew this back at the beginning of April. That's number one. And then number two, he also, and I'm assuming under threat of perjury in the affidavit, indicated that while on a teleconference with the state modelers, the experts within the state of Ohio that the administration is listening to, they said they could not pinpoint the impact of government regulation on the numbers. And I think that's a critical point, because as we continue to see cases go up, all right, what we're going to hear is, well, we need to roll back.
Yeah, so I'll jump in and comment on a couple of things. So about that, so okay. I'm going to jump in on masks, for instance.
Okay.
So I've loved listening to the conversation regarding masks, and I'm not telling people they shouldn't wear masks. As a matter of fact, if you feel like you need to wear a mask, then by all means, wear a mask. But there's been references to the 1918 Spanish flu quite a bit during the course of this, and I've posted on my Facebook page. I don't have it here to bring up with me on the screen now, but the medical analysis of those who were wearing masks during the 1918 Spanish flu is that they were completely ineffective. So just let that sink in for a moment. So if you go back
one more time, the 1918 Spanish flu, the medical
experts at the time regarding mask wearing, which was being heavily supported and encouraged then, was that they were ineffective. Now, that's not a shocker, because if you're paying close attention to the news, you'll know that the reason that we're supposed to wear masks is not to protect you for your own health, is to protect other people. So, in other words, don't cough into your arm or into your hands like we're taught as kids. You've got to have a mask on, because it's going to ensure that folks are less likely, or at least to get sick from your cough. What folks are also talking about is these concept of, you'll see a lot of videos on TV about different ways of transmission. What we have going on right now, I grew up with an insurance guy. My dad was an insurance executive, and so I understand risk management at a very at a very detailed level. Anything that could possibly go wrong when you're a teenager regarding driving a car, I heard about it at the dinner table every single night. So I understand what it means to be risk averse. And so we're in a situation right now where the medical doctors, they're part of their, I got a lot of folks that are watching right now, so I don't mean to speak on their behalf, but what they've told me obviously is it's part of their job is to inform people of not just what's likely to happen, but what are the possible outcomes as well. And we've got a situation from a media and a press perspective where we're picking up on those highly unlikely or rare. Those kind of words, highly unlikely or rare, are placed next to things like surface transmission. Not the most likely way for transmission to occur when it's talking about things like your speech and air coming out of your mouth from just natural breathing. So while you can't rule those things out at any point in time from any respiratory illness, if you go in and you just do your own personal research, I'm not speaking as a medical doctor, I'm just going to point you to the places where this research is found, places like the New England Journal of Medicine. You can go look it up for yourself and read about it there. So what you see on the TV at night, just please know that there's a lot of great research out there that will help you to know how to manage risk in your life. But when you look at the data and you see what the transmission's like, and then you see what are the negative outcomes, as Dr. Frank mentioned earlier, just because cases are going up doesn't mean hospitalizations are going up, doesn't mean deaths are going up. So that drove me to understand what's behind that data. And so we've talked a little bit about repeat testing. And so we know there's situations where folks are getting repeat tested so they can come out of quarantine and they can go back to work. Other scenarios that we know are going on are heavy testing, or what we would call in the data world oversampling. And Dr. Frank, you might want to speak to this in just a moment and talk about to us control groups. I know you talked about this on your page a lot, control groups. And in this scenario, you and I have bantered a little bit about how congregate care settings influences your control group. It also influences your samples. So if you're getting data mixed in that's coming from spikes due to nursing home focus testing, prison home focus testing, and then you try to throw that into a sampling scenario, or I'll use a different word than sampling, a control period, for instance, trending, where it's trying to show 21-day trends. And Dr. Frank, would you mind pulling up on the website? If we go to the top and we